Welcome to this explainer on the Maurya Empire. Picture this, a massive, sprawling empire stretching from the towering Himalayas all the way into Afghanistan and from Bengal way down to the Deccan Plateau. Now imagine all of this incredible unification birthed not in some wealthy royal palace, but from a single, fiery insult. That is the absolutely unbelievable story we're uncovering today. Okay, let's dive right into this. You might be wondering, which empire actually first united the Indian subcontinent? Well, to really wrap our heads around this massive unification, we have to travel back about 2,400 years to the era of the 16 Mahajanapadas. India didn't look anything like the map we know today, and this massive empire certainly didn't just appear out of thin air. Section 1. An insult and a new beginning. Let's set the scene with the political landscape. Magadha was the heavyweight champion of the region, ruled by the Nanda dynasty. King Dhanananda was sitting on immense wealth and some serious military might. We're talking Greek historians recording hundreds of thousands of infantry, cavalry, and those terrifying war elephants. But he had a massive fatal flaw. He was deeply unpopular and facing some serious public anger. Now, contrast that mighty force with a young guy named Chandragupta. Talk about an underdog. No kingdom, no army, literally zero royal treasury. He was discovered by a brilliant Brahmin strategist named Chanakya. And why did Chanakya pick him? Because Dhanananda had publicly insulted Chanakya. Right then and there, Chanakya swore to completely upend India's political landscape. Meanwhile, the outside world is going completely crazy. In 326 BCE, Alexander the Great's army, totally exhausted from years of brutal fighting, flat out refuses to cross the Bias River. When Alexander retreats and then suddenly dies in 323 BCE, his massive empire fractures like glass. The foreign Greek governors left behind in India's northwest were suddenly totally vulnerable. So think about it, a weakened northwest and a deeply unpopular king in the east. It was basically the perfect storm, giving Chanakya and Chandragupta a massive dual opportunity to strike.
Moving on to Section 2, Chandragupta and Chanakya's strategy.
After years of rigorous training in warfare, economics, and espionage, Chandragupta was finally ready for the big leagues. But, fun fact, their first direct attack on the mighty Magadha failed completely. They realized pretty quickly they needed a brand new approach. And this brilliantly illustrates their genius, what ancient tales refer to as the hot roti strategy. It makes total sense, right? You wouldn't eat a piping hot flatbread straight from the burning center. You take a bite from the cooler edges first. So they secured the weakened northwest, slowly chewed away at the borderlands of the Nanda Empire, and only then did they strike the capital, Pataliputra. This slow and steady strategy successfully ended the Nanda dynasty around 322 BCE. Now, the bedrock of this newly formed empire is absolutely fascinating. It was guided by the Arthashastra, written by Chanakya himself. You can actually see modern governance blueprints right in this text. It laid out a highly centralized administration, incredibly strict anti-corruption measures, and get this, a massive interconnected espionage network. Officials were constantly spying on each other. It was basically a real ancient spy thriller, which is exactly what you need to maintain control over such a gigantic territory. Let's quickly track Chandragupta's unbelievable winning streak. After taking Pataliputra in 322 BCE, he squares off against Alexander's former general Seleucus Nicator in 305 BCE. Chandragupta wins, officially securing the borders of modern-day Afghanistan and Pakistan in exchange for, well, 500 war elephants. This treaty also brought in the Greek ambassador Megasthenes, who famously wrote the book Indica. But honestly, his most astonishing move happens in 298 BCE. At the absolute height of his supreme power, Chandragupta voluntarily steps down. No coup, no assassination. He just travels south, becomes a Jain monk, and eventually ends his life through the spiritual fasting practice of Salakana. Talk about going out on your own terms.
Section 3, Bindusara and the expansion of the empire.
With Chandragupta stepping away, the throne passes to his son, Bindusara. Now, Bindusara often gets overshadowed, squeezed right between his legendary dad and his insanely famous son. But make no mistake, the Greeks literally called him Amitragata, meaning slayer of foes. His reign was a total masterclass in balancing aggression with smart diplomacy. He aggressively pushed the empire deep into the Deccan region, covering modern Maharashtra and Karnataka. But, and here's the smart part, he intentionally kept up lucrative trade instead of picking fights with the Deep South, the Cholas and Pandyas. Internationally, the guy was super well connected. He famously asked the Syrian king to send him sweet wine, dried figs, and a philosopher. Crucially, he also prepped his sons for leadership.
A young Ashoka gained some major military chops by putting down rebellions in critical trade hubs like Taxila and Ujjain. Which brings us to Section 4, the Kalinga War and Emperor Ashoka.
So after Bindusara dies, there's a really bitter struggle for the throne. Ashoka eventually comes out on top, formally taking power around 269 BCE. In those early years, he was a fierce, relentless expansionist, totally carrying on the family business of military conquest. His absolute biggest target? Kalinga, located in modern-day Odisha. Kalinga was a wealthy, fiercely independent maritime power. Conquering it wasn't just some ego trip for the emperor. It was literally the critical missing puzzle piece for the Maurya Empire to achieve total continental dominance. Kalinga controlled vital land routes down south and these incredibly lucrative sea trade routes stretching all the way to Southeast Asia. In 261 BCE, Ashoka invaded, and the result was one of the most devastating conflicts in all of ancient history. 100,000. Let that sink in for a second. That is the staggering number of people killed in the Kalinga War. Another 150,000 were captured, and countless more died later from disease, starvation, and just sheer displacement. This wasn't just a military casualty list. These were everyday citizens fighting and dying to defend their homes. The devastation was so horrific that Ashoka personally recorded this profound human tragedy in his own inscriptions.
Section 5, the policy of Dhamma and welfare.
So the crucial point here is Ashoka didn't just witness all that slaughter and instantly morph into a peaceful monk right there on the blood-soaked battlefield like you see in the movies. Actually, it was a really gradual, agonizing realization over several years that fundamentally flipped his entire worldview upside down. He poured this profound shift into his famous 13th Rock Edict. He realized that land won by the sword only brings sorrow, and he famously declared that the greatest victory is Dhamma Vijaya, moral victory. He took the entire focus of the Maurya Empire and pivoted it from aggressive, bloody conquest to public welfare and ethical living. But, and this is key, he did this without actually disbanding his massive army. The borders were absolutely still defended, but the offensive, unprovoked aggression completely stopped. His public welfare initiatives were, quite frankly, shockingly modern for the time. He planted trees for shade and built rest houses for weary travelers. He built hospitals, and not just for humans, but for animals too. Seriously, animal hospitals 2,400 years ago. He appointed these special officials called Dhamma Mahamatras, who had strict orders to be accessible to the public literally at all times. Whether the emperor was eating or sleeping, they were there to solve grievances. It fundamentally changed how a ruler interacted with his subjects. He even sent his own kids, Mahendra and Sanghamitra, down to Sri Lanka, which played a massive role in turning Buddhism into a global religion. And you've got to hear about the 12th Rock Edict. It actually urged strict religious tolerance. Ashoka put it in writing that no one should disparage other religions while honoring their own. I mean, think about how incredibly progressive that is for a monarch back then. It proves that Ashoka wasn't out there forcing his personal Buddhist beliefs on everybody. Instead, he was actively promoting universal, ethical harmony across his entire massive domain. And finally, Section 6, the Empire's Fall and Legacy. Now, sadly, no golden age lasts forever. After Ashoka died around 232 BCE, the empire managed to limp along for about 50 more years, but it began this slow, tragic decay under a series of much weaker successors like Dasharatha and Samprati. Now, what's really interesting here is that people love to blame Ashoka's pacifism for the fall, but actually, scratch that. It was a total systemic failure of administration that dragged on for decades. You basically had weak successors who just couldn't hold the massive centralized bureaucracy together. Tax collection totally crumbled. Provinces like Kalinga and Kashmir decided they'd had enough and rebelled. And on top of all that, Indo-Greek invasions started heavily pressing those northwest borders again. The empire simply hollowed out from the inside. The whole shebang officially ended with a massive final blow in 185 BCE. The very last Maurya emperor, Brihadratha, was publicly assassinated right in the middle of a military parade. And the killer? His own army commander, Pushyamitra Shunga. The bitter historical irony here is just wild. An empire that was literally born when a clever commander overthrew a deeply unpopular king ended exactly 137 years later in the exact same violent way. But hey, let's bring the energy back up. Because what survived is truly breathtaking. The Maurya Empire didn't just vanish into the sands of time. Their centralized bureaucratic blueprints from the Arthashastra, they are literally still studied in universities today. They forged massive international trade networks, connecting India all the way to Greece and Egypt. They were the catalyst for the spread of Buddhism across Asia.
And structurally, their legacy is still visibly beating right in the heart of modern India. The magnificent lion capital of Sarnath is India's national emblem, and that Ashoka chakra sits proudly right in the absolute center of India's national flag.
So what does this all mean? It leaves us with a pretty massive, provocative thought to consider. Does history remember conquerors or peacemakers? The Maurya Empire gave us Chandragupta, the ultimate conqueror, and Ashoka, the ultimate peacemaker. Which legacy do you think truly lasted longer? Thanks for hanging out with me on this explainer. I really hope it sparked your curiosity, and I'll see you in the next one.